Oh, good afternoon, Archbishop, clergy, and my fellow laity. Peace be with you. I come not to stir you up with anger, but to embolden you to be courageous. Bob Flint has laid out for you the clear decision that you must make. He has outlined the religious freedom this country has held so dear since its inception. He has impressed upon you the importance of speaking with your vote. I echo his peaceful call to arms, but wish to fortify you with the ammunition you will need to wage this battle against the HHS mandate and Proposition 5, from sea to shining sea. I say this: think clearly, pray unceasingly, and speak unequivocally. We have entered a similar arena of battle that was waged in 1973 about the dignity of the human person that was ultimately denied that year by the Supreme Court. Like then, the fundamental liberties of man were usurped by flawed thinking and bad law. Yet I would remind you that Roe versus Wade continues to fester in this country. I love it when I see the bumper stickers on certain cars that say, "It is a child, not a choice." Because this country attempts to make bad law does not mean that it cannot be refuted day after day by us. Truth will always triumph, though the price that will be paid is often the ultimate sacrifice. I call on you to fight this mandate and this proposition with the same zeal and certainty of God's approval as those who have long been in the pro-life trenches. You must begin by fighting the modern culture's inclination to usurp or steal the language of the argument. In this debate, I have already heard the word rights, conscience, and sexuality bandied around from the bully pulpit with no attempt to reconcile those words with reality. When the federal government says that every woman has the right to birth control, they do not mean this word in the same way the Founding Fathers meant it. Instead, they are using right to mean license to do as I please without regard to justice and the common good. A right, as the Founding Fathers understood it, is a law recognizable by all humans that precedes human law. Thus, the Founding Fathers codified the Bill of Rights as that which all man recognized to be their due in order for the Constitution to be properly effected. Do not, my friends, surrender this word and its proper meaning to the secular culture. Similarly, fight for the proper definition of conscience. Conscience, our reason and faith tell us, must adhere to an objective criteria. It is not, as the secular culture defines it, merely based on my strong opinion and my strong feelings and my strong personal preference. It is the voice that intrudes whenever humans veer from virtue and move towards vice. It is simply ridiculous to think that a man or woman's conscience could authentically lead him or her to determine that they must go against what they know to be moral in order to placate the federal or the state or even the local government. Nor is it possible, using a man or woman's conscience properly, that he or she ignores the reality of what God has shown us about the creation of man and woman in order to give credence to aberrant sexual appetite couched in erroneous terms like sexual orientation and transgender identity. My conscience rightly urges me to treat my fellow human being with the dignity he or she deserves, by virtue of being created by God, not because of the uniqueness of his or her sexual preference. Do not, my friends, surrender the word conscience to the secular culture. When, in the course of your battle to maintain religious freedom, you find yourself in a discussion about human sexuality, again, do not surrender the terms of the argument to the secular culture. The HHS mandate, whose primary impetus is to encourage voluntary self-sterilization and thus limit the population in this country, seeks to render sexual intimacy a mere function of humanity for the purpose of pleasure alone. Proposition 5 seeks to ignore the nature of man and redefine him based on one aspect of man rather than the whole. We are not first sexual creatures alone. We are ensouled beings with a mind, body, and spirit that must operate together in a harmonious and orderly fashion in order to give glory to God, man's ultimate end. Therefore, to improperly place one's sexual appetites at the top of the hierarchy of man, rather than man's ability to reason, is to render man equivalent to all other animals and subject him to his instincts rather than his reason and his properly formed will. In other words, Proposition 5 asks us not to see the whole person and honor each human being for who he or she really is, but to interact with him in the way a kennel of dogs or cats or mice or ants might behave. Pope Benedict XVI articulated this in a speech he gave in Germany in 2006. He said, "Man too has a nature that he must respect and that he cannot manipulate at will. Man is not merely a self-creating freedom. Man does not create himself. He is intellect and will, but he is also nature. And his will is rightly ordered if he respects his nature, listens to it, and accepts himself for who he is as one who did not create himself. In this way and in no other is true human freedom fulfilled." I ask you again, my friends, do not surrender the definition of human sexuality to the secular culture. They seek to reduce man to his appetites and to make him equal to the rest of the animal kingdom. Proposition 5 desires to force us to see only one aspect of our fellow man instead of honoring the whole. Finally, I wish to arm you with a few terms that have gone out of fashion, but that remain true and helpful to people of faith who must respond every time their religious liberties are threatened. First of all, never surrender or betray what the natural law inscribed in our hearts tells us. Though we may struggle to understand God's messages and his vision for how to proceed in this brave new world we live in, he does arm us with reason such that when we look to reality, study humanity, pray, and live virtuous lives, we can see the truth of the human person. We can live a life that is respectful of our fellow man without subjecting ourselves to arguments that are based on feelings, relativism, might makes right, or tyranny. Natural law anchors us in a certainty of man's vocation and his ultimate calling. We as followers of Christ know that God's call for us to follow him transcends man's inclination to follow his fallen nature and make immoral decisions in the way he lives his life. My friends, continue to impress upon your opponents in this argument that there is an objective truth to which natural law requires us to adhere. The truth is that man deserves dignified treatment not for his sexual proclivities or desire to have control over her body, but is dignified because he or she was created by God to live in virtue and seek ultimate happiness with him. Last but not least, I mention a long-forgotten principle that the Catholic Church promulgates. The principle of subsidiarity is germane to the HHS mandate in that it would say that the federal government far oversteps its bounds and its reason for being. The principle of subsidiarity states that a community of a higher order should not interfere in the internal life of a community of a lower order, depriving the latter of its functions, but rather should support it in case of need and help to coordinate its activity with the activities of the rest of society, always with a view to the common good. This term effectively defends our current position that the federal, state, and local government ought not to intrude on our religious liberty in order to effect a mandate and a law that does not have the common good in mind. The implicit call to sterilization of the species in the HHS mandate and the discriminatory intolerance of Proposition 5 violate in every way the principle of subsidiarity. I thank you for your attention. I applaud you for your courage, and I remind you to frame the argument according to language that relates to reality and correctly defines the terms I have mentioned to you this afternoon. When you engage in battle on this issue, as you will surely do, I urge you to remember my little motto: think clearly, pray unceasingly, and speak unequivocally. God bless you all, and God bless this dear country.